So welcome to our webinar today, and we are going to learn more about Estonia. So basically, this is the International Emergency Management Society and Capacity Building International's 2022 webinar series on international emergency management models. And thanks for joining us and welcome once again. My name is Kalev Karu. I'm the Managing Director of Capacity Building International, and we are so glad to have someone with us today, Kalev, to help present the Estonia model for how they manage crisis domestically as well. And so this is going to be very interesting. But before we get started, as always, we're going to have a few administrative remarks and announcements as we get started into the webinar itself. So first of all, this is our 2022 webinar series on international models of emergency management. And today we are discussing Estonia. And this is, of course, done in partnership with CBI and the International Emergency Management Society. Now, normally, Harold Dreger is with us, but I think he's currently traveling at the moment, so he's not going to be here with us today. But we are joined by Kalev Karu, who is a crisis manager with the Government of Estonia, who's going to present their model and information today, and we'll get to that very shortly. But there are a few quick points before we get started. So first of all, where are you joining us from? If you can let us know in the chat, that would be great. And then, of course, use the Q&A feature. If you have any questions about for Kalev and what he's presenting in terms of the models, and any questions about the systems, processes, things like that, as we go through the presentation today, then go ahead and just use that Q&A feature. That allows us to have those questions pop up in front of us, and then we can see them, and then we can address them after the presentation is done and towards the end. All of the 2021 sessions that we recorded last year, I think there are about 24 of them, they are actually on the team's website. And they're also on the CBI YouTube page. And so we covered about 24 sessions last year, which went through a number of different countries and also in partnership with the University of Manchester and others. And so I would really recommend, if you haven't seen those, take a look at those. They're great reference points as well if you want to look and see what other nations and other systems are doing. And for 2022, what we've done thus far, we did a lot last year. We sort of scaled that down a little bit. So we're doing a webinar every month thus far. And so we're getting into our fourth webinar now, if I could talk today. Our fourth webinar now in terms of national models that we've looked at this year, and we've had Bangladesh, Italy, and Spain, and today with Estonia. And of course, if you have any requests, if you'd like to hear from any particular country that we haven't covered before, or maybe you are representing a country that you would like to present yourself, then certainly please do let me know. And you can just drop me a message here in the chat or and certainly let me know, or just send me an email and respond to the Zoom invitations, for example, or the reminders. You can respond to those emails as well. Just let me know if there's a country you would like to see. But for the 2022 program, so just as I was talking about, we dropped this down to a monthly webinar series because we did a lot last year. But we've also at CBI, we have our podcast called the Crisis Conflict Emergency Management, was something else that we delivered and started talking to industry experts in certain fields, reflecting these sort of the intersection of these three topics. And that's coming out every month. And then there is the 2022 Teams Annual Conference that I will talk about here very shortly. Some exciting stuff going on there. And of course, we have a Teams community that is in development as well for international emergency managers, academia, and everyone else for around the globe. We also have published a Crisis Conflict Emergency Management newsletter, which is available on LinkedIn. And so go ahead and feel free to jump over to LinkedIn. And that is a newsletter that comes out once a month. And join the around, I think it's nearly 7,000 people that are on that newsletter as well. If you're coming from academia, or if you would like to have something made as an announcement inside of this newsletter, feel free to let me know. So we've started opening it now and start shaping it into more of a publication as well. And so that's going to be coming up in the future. In the meantime, if you want to publish a paper or anything else, simply let us know and we'll be happy to distribute that through our network. Or even if you have events coming up in your own nation and what you would like to share with others, certainly just feel free to send me a message. And this is, again, our podcast is there as well. You can certainly take a look at that. And then that comes out every month as well as our newsletter and our webinar series. And we also, just a quick announcement, are launching our final iteration for this year on our NATO Crisis Management and Disaster Response course, which is going to be opening towards the end of August. So you can take a look at that and you can see some of the feedback from Mo, who was one of our students in our last course, who works in Apple and Global Threat Risk Management. And he was very happy with the results of that course as well. And so we'll be able to put that link in the chat throughout the webinar so that you'll be able to respond to that, take a look at that. and go ahead and sign up while the registration is now open. Course starts on August 29th. And now Harold's not here, so I am going to go ahead and cover his piece for the conference for this year. And the conference this year, the Teams 2022 Hybrid Annual Conference. So it's going to be in person now that we're all sort of out of the pandemic period. And it's going to be online as well. So October 17th to October 21st is going to be at Kennesaw State University in Atlanta, Georgia. So you can attend if you are in the United States, or if you want to travel to the United States, even better. But you also have the opportunity to attend online. And so it's going to be in a hybrid format. And I think the last count that I got was that there are 40 presentations from 30 different countries, if I recall correctly, from what Harold is telling me. The point is, it's going to be very diverse in topics and interests, and I think you're going to find a lot that you would like to see inside this conference. So I highly recommend heading over to teamsusa.com or Teams website at teams.info, as you can see on the slide there. And go ahead and sign up, start registering. And then especially if you want to submit anything, and go ahead and do that now. I think Harold mentioned that he was extending the deadline for that as well. So highly recommended. I will be there. The rest of my team will be there, and we will all be attending. So that is certainly something to do in October. Okay, now, so the announcements are over. So now I will certainly hand this over to Kalev. Kalev, over to you. And thanks for joining us today.
Welcome everyone on behalf of Estonia and the Estonian Government Office. Today we'll talk about the international models in emergency management and how Estonia is managing crisis. But what we are talking about, let me give you a quick overview. First, short introduction to myself and Estonia. Then we'll cover the basis of Estonian crisis management and how we do things in the future, or has been done in the past. Then we talk about the Estonian way today in crisis management. Then about next steps, and in conclusions, let's talk about what we have found already. So, about my background, in 2005, I started working for Estonian National Committee for UNICEF, so NGO. In 2008, I joined Estonian police forces, mainly on criminal police side, but also law enforcement background. In 2017, Estonian National Situation Center was founded, and in the Government Office, and I'm one of the first employees here. In 2019, I became Estonian delegate to EU IPCR Integrated Political Crisis Response Friends of Presidency Group. In 2020, when the pandemic hit all over the world, I became the member of Estonian National COVID-19 Crisis Team. And in 2021, last year, I became the Crisis Preparedness Manager in Estonian Government Office. So, but about me, that's, I think, enough. Let's talk about Estonia. We are quite small country. Our neighbors in the north is Finland, in the south Latvia, in west we have Sweden, and in the east we have big neighboring country Russia. 45,000 square kilometers, population about 1.3 million if we take the last consensus taken last year. We have 15 counties, the picture here depicts them as well, but we have 79 municipalities, about 15 of them are towns, also including capital of called Tallinn, and 64 parishes. We have 1 prime minister and 14 ministries. But we also have Schengen external border in the east, which is 333 and 7 kilometers long. About 2/3 of it is actually not on land, but on the water, called Lake Peipus. Although relatively small country, we have about 1 event per year, that is considered to be a crisis that requires either local level or government level coordination and or international cooperation. But what is the basis to Estonian crisis management? In following slides, I will go over the ramification that forms the basis of this Estonian crisis management system. What we use is comprehensive approach to national defense. It's not something very new, but it's not something very old, in the sense that we renewed it this year, and this approach is now for next 9 years up to 2031. Comprehensive approach actually comprises of 5 pillars, and the idea behind this is to be ready for every kind of crisis. And the purpose of comprehensive national defense is to prepare and defend the country by using all the possible capabilities, military as well as non-military, at the disposal of the government in a coordinated way. So what are those 5 pillars? Firstly, military defense. Secondly, internal security. Third, resilient state and society. Then strategic communication and psychological defense. And last but not definitely least, diplomatic and international relations in support of national defense. Well, we know about threats and risks. All those items depicted here are possible activators for crisis, but it's definitely not a comprehensive list. And the problem of crisis management or crisis management scenarios are multiple key players and overlap of resources. So what we can see here is that we have 2 divisions, so-called. We have security crisis, we have civilian crisis. We have intentional side as well as unintentional environmental side. And then we have in the middle something that might be one or other. But the problem is we have 2 parallel systems for national crisis management. Since regaining our independence from Soviet Union in 1991, we have had these 2 different systems, military, non-military. Actually, last year it began to change, when crisis coordination became the responsibility of Government Office. So something has already changed. The coordination part is now all in the Government Office. And the reason why we changed this system is that we have learned our lessons from last several crises. What we know is that plans are necessary to start the initial phase of crisis management. We know that the regional level must be engaged, but we also know that crisis preparedness varies greatly throughout ministries and agencies. So we have planned something. Actually, today there are 3 major legal acts that are the basis for crisis management in Estonia. We have Emergency Act in force from 2017 that concerns all civilian crises. We have National Defense Act in force from 2017 that concerns all military side crises. And then we have State of Emergency Act in force from 1996 that tries to put them together. But is it enough? No. At the Government Office, we are preparing the unification of them into one act that comprises them together and is usable for different crisis scenarios. And this is called Emergency and National Defense Preparedness Act. Hopefully, during a couple of next months, it will be ready and put into vote in Parliament. Let's talk about the Estonian way today. Next slides will actually cover how crisis response and management is organized today. We have 4 principles in crisis management, and those principles are stated in legal act. Up to 2017, they were not mandatory, but now they are. Firstly, we have sectoral responsibility. What does it mean? It means that each sector is first responder in crisis relevant to this sector. Next, we have persistence of tasks. Even in crisis, we see that the regular tasks of relevant ministry or agency must be continued and they have to be fulfilled. And of course, we have cooperation. You don't have to do everything by yourself. You can ask for help from other agencies, other relevant authorities, and this help will be given. And last but not least, we have nearness principle. It means that responsibility and management of crisis is where it must, at the lowest possible but high enough level. How can it be? Well, this is how crisis management organization is built up in Estonia. We have government and prime minister. At the government office, we have government security committee, and below government ministries, agencies, we have president who is responsible for National Defense Council meetings, and we have parliament at the legislative side. We also have local governments. We have what we ourselves call vital services. Those are necessary for the country to work effectively. We have public entities and we have NGOs and volunteers. For instance, we have Estonian Defense League, which is, let's say, it's a military organization, but it's voluntary based. They get the same training that our military has. Then volunteers, we have voluntary sea rescue, we have assistant police officers. If there's anybody from Great Britain, it's similar to special constables there. So, but there is something missing. Where does it all come together? At the government office, at the National Situation Center. This is active on 24/7 principle. What we do here is monitor, we analyze emerging threats and deep problems. Actually, what we do is we create situational awareness for all the major key players, starting from the government and ending by local governments and different agencies. And when I talked about the comprehensive approach, based on this, we have circle of security, including emergencies. So, although depicted in circle, all pillars are actually interconnected and form a single unified approach. Let's go investigate those pillars. Military defense. At the government level, we have Minister for Defense. Today, it's Mr. Pevkur, who has previously been also Minister of Interior Affairs and Minister of Justice. So we have Estonian Defense Forces, which is led by Lieutenant General Herem. We have Defense League on the voluntary side, which is led by Brigade General Ühtegi. The military defense is necessary to have effective prevention, deterrence, and repulsion of military attack. The aim is to have independent defense capability. We strongly, let's say, enforced collective defense, and also this is the part where the civilian military cooperation comes together. Then we have internal security, responsible for public order, constitutional order, border guard and border control, mass evacuation, firefighting, emergency medical service, search and rescue cases. And it actually has many, many players. We have Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Social Affairs, Tax and Customs Board, Internal Security Service, Police and Border Guard, Health Board, and so on and so on. And then comes the hard part, resilient state and society. What makes a state resilient and society resilient? There are many players, many different levels engaged in this pillar. It starts at the continuity of government and institutions. There are vital services like fuel, electricity, cash flow, communication, electronic identification, and so on and so on. All those are necessary so the nation can operate effectively. Also, in case of crisis, there has to be emergency inventory, food, medical supplies, again, fuel, so on. There is a civil protection component strongly in this pillar, and civilian support to military defense as well. As you probably know, the crisis starts in the heads of people, and actually the crisis communication and strategic communication and psychological defense must come at the very beginning of each and every crisis. This is the part that all the ministries, all the agencies, all the key players and the government office is responsible for. At the government office in Estonia, we have special unit dealing with strategic communication. They are also responsible for psychological defense in Estonia. So this is to ensure people's support to defense policy choices and the decisions made by the government. Also supporting our allies in public, identifying, neutralizing disinformation and not so supportive campaigns, and also crisis communication. But what about our international relations? Of course, we have this as the final, but not the least important pillar. This is concerns about allied relations, whether it's NATO, whether it's EU, either they are bilateral or multilateral relations. And this is to ensure the support to Estonia in case of crisis. You may ask about trainings. Do we have trainings? Do we have exercises? Yes, all those 5 pillars must be trained into the muscle memory of key players. So minimum once in 2-year period at the government level, we have major crisis exercise. Also, local municipalities have to have crisis exercises at least once per 4-year period. We have trainings and exercises for agencies and interagencies. All these crisis exercises are coordinated by Government Office, and this national crisis exercise plan is reviewed yearly. And next year, actually, we have major full-scale live exercise. It's based on the scenario where there is major accident at one of the key ports, and the result is that we have to evacuate very large amount of people all over to different places in Estonia. So different ministries, different agencies, international cooperation, everything will be put together in the final exercise 2023 in October. So about the steps we are taking or already have been taken. The processes that have been already started, as I said, starting from last year, the crisis policy coordination is in one place, not in different places anymore. Government Office of Estonia is now responsible for coordination. What we are doing, we are implementing the 4-stage readiness model throughout agencies, ministries, and up to the local governments level. Legal framework is under review. We are preparing for the new legal act that comprises different acts into one unified system. We are also reviewing our sectoral plans for crisis. Those include agencies, those include ministries who are responsible for crisis management. How to be more effective in case of crisis? That is something that we have planned. Hopefully, starting from next year, we will have special training program for senior officials and heads of agencies in crisis management. That's something we see as a vital part that all over the country, all over agencies, all over ministries, each and every key player who is responsible for crisis management knows the same principles how to deal with crisis. So to conclude, let's say that our eyes have opened. We see that comprehensive crisis preparedness is the way forward for Estonia. What we try to do, we try to have all hazard approach, whole of society approach. So each and every person is actually part of the crisis management. We try to have holistic approach. So mitigation, prevention, protection, response, recovery. So it comes together. And also something we call capability-based approach. So each player inputs in his own capability. And the result is we move from comprehensive defense to comprehensive preparedness. So actually, this pretty much ends. I hope you have questions.
I do have a few questions, actually. Can you go back to the organizational structure slide? I think it was one of the first slides that we had, and then we'll let some other people have some time to ask some questions. This is very interesting, and maybe in terms of maybe it's better to look at the next one where you sort of had the table. I think it was.
I believe it's.
Or it was before.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because in many different sort of societies that we've looked at and different national models, there's always, or at least in many cases, there's been a division between the military side on the planning side, and then also, of course, the civilian side. And so, what was a major catalyst to bring this under one sort of coordination level in Estonia?
Well, actually, the discussions started 2014, but when the Ukraine war actually started. I think the most effective catalyst was COVID crisis, pandemic, because it was actually first time in re-independent Estonia when the head of government, prime minister, took the management of the crisis into his hands. And this was something that we saw when we needed both sides, so civilian side and military side. And I think this was it was the catalyst that actually turned our eyes to this approach that we have to have unified approach to both civilian and military crisis. But let's see how it comes together. We have had quite thorough work, almost a year, comprising this new legal act. We have had discussions with both active military officers at the ministries, we have at the social affairs. So we have tried to put together something that takes into consideration all the necessities, but each and every one of them has said that, yeah, this is the way to go. We have to have unified system. Let me just go back a couple of slides. Yeah.
This is also interesting. Yeah.
So, as I said, it's not a comprehensive list, but what we see is an overlap. Today, cyber incidents, they can be intentional. It affects military side, so security crisis, but it affects civilian society as well. Influx of migrants at large scale, what we have seen last years. Is it a military threat? It can be. But is it a civilian threat for a social system? Definitely it is. So the approach and the methods used in crisis management are basically the same. So we don't have to have two different systems. Yes, there are specifics, but the overall system is the same and the methods are the same. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, no, that's great. I think this is becoming more of a reality for people, and in terms of especially sort of post-Russian Federation invasion of Ukraine and sort of blending these things together. And I also see that you are in Estonia, you're sort of closely aligned to sort of NATO resilience baselines and NATO crisis management process as well, in terms of the overall CRS and the system that's in use there. And I think that's really interesting in those terms. And we do actually have a question here, and it sort of leads on that NATO discussion as well, is that to what extent was your design in Estonia a function of independent experience in Estonia, and to what extent is that designed for interoperability with the US and partners? I have some input on that too, but I'll let you go first, of course.
Yeah, actually, I think that we have gathered ideas from different countries, different organizations, but the initial idea is something that came to us. But of course, then we started to look for the models used in different countries, different organizations, and we tried to adapt them to our own needs. So it's not an exact copy, but yeah, it's something similar.
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of sort of the international, I don't want to call it standardization, but sort of the interoperability piece. And so if you're aligning yourself, for example, towards the overall, NATO crisis response system and process, and then you have interoperability, if once you're in NATO, interoperability with the military side in terms of and forces in that way, and force integration. And then if like in Estonia and like Norway and other countries, you're aligned in that NATO CRS system, you have very similar systems, which are also loosely, fit within the US model and many other models as well. And then in terms of that, I think with international assistance, then of course you have the entire EU mechanism, which provides an alignment on the EU side. You have the UN system and UN OCHA, which provides sort of an interoperability and alignment with the UN system. And so I think there's a lot of interoperability built into these sort of larger strategic national level issues.
Yeah, that's something we try to have, to take from each and every model something that can be adapted to our specific organization in Estonia. But nevertheless, we are part of NATO, we are part of UN, we are part of the International Alliance for Emergency. So there is something we share in every country.
Right. And so we had another question, it was in the chat, but which was essentially, what are some of the, I hope you don't mind if I just generalize it a little bit, but what are some of the, are these the typical scenarios that you're looking at when you're doing your planning in Estonia? So criminal attack, cyber incidents, these types of things.
They are some of the factors that we take into considerations, but as I said, it's not a comprehensive list. For instance, terror attack, starting from 9/11, it's something each and every country has to take into consideration. Concerning the climate changes, wildfires, floods, storms. So they are quite understandable definitions, but they are something we have to have in mind when we make plans.
Can we go to the map that you have of Estonia again with your municipalities?
Yep.
And what I've noticed in certain sort of working with different countries and different levels of basically in sizes of countries and population and things like that, there's always been a question in terms of when you have your system, what is the tipping point to where it doesn't become a municipal level issue, and when does it become a whole of government issue? And that's generally based in my experience, and I'd really like to hear your thoughts and how you handle it in Estonia. It generally becomes, for me, it's an issue of, in my opinion, size and complexity. The bigger it is, of course, in a smaller country, then of course it's become a national issue. And it's also in terms of complexity. If it's like a technical, really technical event, chemical, biological, whatever, that is a technical issue that then has to draw on other government resources. So therefore it becomes a national incident as well.
Yeah, actually, you're quite correct in this sense that as we are so little country by area, and sooner or later, each and every crisis ends up at the government level, at the prime minister level. But as I talked about the principles in crisis management, those 4 principles, one of them was nearness. So at first responders, responsibility and crisis management is at the lowest possible level, but as high level as necessary to manage the crisis. So if I show you this map we have, actually this part here, capital area, we have 1/3 of population. So of course the government is situated at the capital, the president is here. We are almost certain that all major crises affect this area, so they take very active role in crisis management. Last Prime Minister, Mr. Ratas, and our current Prime Minister, Ms. Kallas, they take very active part in each and every crisis.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. It's more just out of necessity, right? I mean, simply because it's almost just an issue of resources than anything else at the end of the day.
We have a saying here that the Prime Minister is just 2 calls away. Even if it's a law enforcement problem, let's say it's mass riots like we had in 2007, bronze riots. So there was 2 calls and the Prime Minister took actions. So
true, very interesting. And so when you have 14 ministries, I mean, how does that work at an interagency level between ministry level coordination? Is it
just to be a little bit more specific? Although we have 14 ministries, we have a little bit more ministers. So, for instance, Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications has 2 different ministers. So it's not a problem per se, because at the chancellor's levels, there are meeting every week. We have government meetings and cabinet office meetings every week. So I think the cooperation between different ministries and different fields of responsibility work very well. Of course, there is always a way to improve, but at the actual working level, it comes together very well and very effectively.
Oh, that's good. So we had a question in terms of, in my experience, this for me specifically when I work internationally and in emergency management models, it's a comparative question between how does it look with states in the United States and municipalities, or say even I would say comparatively sized populations in terms of what happens in European countries and then in the United States. So generally, do we all use common models? Is it the most common model, or is it based on regional experiences? How do we compare that with the United States? And in my experience, what I found, and one of the reasons why I asked you that question, Kalev, is because one of the things that I found is trying to understand what other nations are doing is looking at the size of the population as a comparative analysis towards another state. So if we were looking at Estonia, and then maybe that matches with Delaware or something, and sort of looking at it in that and similar size, population, and resource capability. The government structures are always largely somewhat similar, maybe with just different names, but there's a prime minister, or there's a governor, or there's a national guard, or a military, or there's these functional areas are largely all about the same. And the way that they're just set up together is again slightly different, and nomenclature and resources and capability, legislation is often sometimes different, and responsibilities are sometimes different. But I think for the most part, a way to get at that and to answer this kind of specific question is that if you look at resources and size comparisons, you can draw some parallels between the two different nations just based on population, resource allocation, and then things and you'll start to see the models sort of come out, because everybody, especially like you've already said here today, Estonia is in NATO, is in the EU, is in the UN, and so there's a lot of interoperability already built in. Systems are very similar, just because of that basis that you'll start to see a lot of similarity between similar sized countries, especially ones that are well integrated, like Estonia is. Okay. So anybody have any other questions? I think we are just about out of time. Looks like there's no. Somebody raised a hand. Can you just put your question in the Q&A? I see that you raised your hand, which is great, but maybe just drop a quick question in would be good. And I think one of the things, and it's always going to be a question, you probably have already gotten it already, but what have you sort of seen as a change? There has been a shift in sort of the mentality in the population in Estonia after the Russian Federation invasion of Ukraine? Has it shifted now really to civil defense and some other aspects? Or is it just sort of reinforced your planning already, I guess? And sorry, I cut you off real quick.
Actually, the mentality change took place already 2014. But what we see is that we don't demonize the nation as such, but the regime is responsible, and the leaders are responsible for the actions, not nationality. It doesn't matter whether the person is Russian, whether it's Estonian, Latvian, whatever, but people and leaders are responsible for the actions taken by the nation, either it's military or something quite different. So the change is taking place. It has taken place already up to a level, but I think starting from February this year, it has, let's say, it has changed more rapidly than since February.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think it just sort of confirms some scenarios that people were already planning for anyway, and again, it could be anything that you're planning for, but it sort of confirmed these as well. And Estonia's already been sort of heavy into cyber already, and sort of done a lot of work in that area. And so a lot of these sort of realities could almost serve just as a confirmation of a lot of things that you were already planning and preparing for. Okay, great. So just 1 second. Let me just throw up. If there are any other questions or if you have anything else, basically, what's the best way to be able to reach out to you, Kalev, and to be able to, if somebody has any questions or want to follow up with any additional sort of...
I think by email is the most easiest way. Let me just put it my email into the chat.
Okay, great.
So now it's in the chat, and I think this is the easiest way to contact me.
Perfect. So if you have any questions and you just want to reach out to Kalev and to be able to ask any questions about how the Estonian system works, please do so. And of course, this will be recorded and it's going to be up later on the CBI YouTube page. You can also watch this again, just in case. And again, thank you very much for your time, everybody. And let me actually just really quickly just remind you about the Teams annual conference that's coming up. So let me just grab this really quick. I'm going to drop it in the chat right after the... Just 1 second. Okay, Teams annual conference. Make sure you go to this website, teams.info. All right. I just want to make sure you get that out there so everybody registers and go ahead and attend. This will be in virtual and in person. It's going to be a great event, so make sure you attend. And once again, thanks a lot, Kalev. It was great. It was really good information and presentation, and we will be in touch. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.